I'm Jennifer Solenthavong. My story starts with my children, who are both adopted. Daniel is 7, almost 8. He'll be 8 in June. He came to us when he was 3.5 years old. He was unexpected. We didn't know how to change diapers. We had fostered teenagers, and here came a beautiful blonde-haired, blue-eyed baby that they sort of said, hey, in 2 hours we're going to deliver a baby. And with that, you kind of need a crib and you need diapers and you need to know how to make formula, and you need to know how to swaddle a baby and all these things that we didn't know how to do. But as we became more and more bonded, and it was clear when he wasn't with us, his different reaction, that it would be damaging to him to not be with us because we know about attachment. And after all, he came to us at 3.5 weeks, so we're the only parents he's known, we thought. We always knew Daniel was different. In the hospital bed when he was born, the workers that were there reported he was literally so strong and so active he was flipping over in the hospital bed. And they'd never seen that before. And he was very inquisitive very early on, and he did everything early. He made sounds early and imitated early and talked early and ate an amazing amount of food. We continue to see differences between him and his peers. He would bite more, climb more, loved lights. If there was any kind of excitement, would become assaultive. And at a young age, to an extent, you sort of expect these behaviors, but his was beyond that. We kept him in church as much as we could. At one point, we tried to go to a church that was closer to us and found out, unfortunately, that some churches aren't or don't understand children that are difficult, don't have the ability to work with them. It didn't feel like a welcome environment. It felt more like a judgment in parenting when he was unable to function with the other kids, other preschool-aged kids at church. In that time and during that time, Jamar came to us, and Jamar was 3 years old. And with him came new challenges because he was born addicted, and what that means is going for days at a time without sleep and problems eating, tremors. He needed massages regularly because his muscles were over tightened. You could tell that he was in pain, and the kind of cry that he had, there's one sound that sounds like a child that is going through withdrawals. And there's nothing else like it. And once you hear it, it just hurts inside. You feel his pain. And so I remember sometimes being so tired that I would start seeing things that weren't there. And it's a different tired than college, especially over 30 years old. And we got through that time. Eventually, some of our fears dissipated because his soft spot in his head healed. That was a concern for a while. He, on top of everything else, would have had to wear a helmet because he was starting to walk and his soft spot wasn't healed. And obviously, his brain would have been injured. He was at high risk for additional brain injury, not just from the drugs, but from the fall. And so that sort of was miraculous because he had a fairly large hole essentially in the skull on top of his head, and that all of a sudden healed fairly quickly when the next step would have been scans to see how big the gap was. The doctor talked about he would likely have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and so we braced ourselves for that. He seemed a little more disconnected than we had experienced with Daniel. but we don't have a normal gauge because Daniel wasn't normal either. And Daniel's this beautiful child that everybody likes, but that they struggle with at the same time because of his energy level and his willfulness. Jamar would sit back and watch Daniel with big eyes. And we always wondered what he was thinking because he was a little bit slower to talk and a little bit slower to walk. And his body had to even out going through all the health changes he needed to go through. And as soon as he could walk, they were the best of friends. As the years have gone on and they've both come into school, we have had multiple workers, particularly with Daniel. Pretty much any organization and institution you can think of, we've had workers for him. We took him to Iowa City when he was 5. We suspected ADHD and autism based on the severity of his behaviors. 5 is the earliest we could take him. So as soon as we could take him, we took him. They diagnosed him at that time with ADHD and anxiety disorder. We questioned some of the behaviors that he had, and they explained his anxiety. If we had problems, come back. We're new parents. We don't know what we're doing. So we're gonna listen to the teachers, and we're gonna listen to AEA. And we're gonna pray about it. And we're gonna come back to Ashworth Road because there's so many professionals and loving people and prayer warriors here that really care about the boys as individuals and that will help us through it and provide their knowledge and support. At 7 years old, he's already tried to commit suicide, talked about being suicidal, not just when he's angry. That started when he was 6. He has opened his bedroom window, second-story bedroom window, and tried to push the screen out. He has stabbed himself in the ear with a pencil and caused some damage to his ear. We can't leave him alone to play, and we feel exhausted. I think where God runs through this for us, and the reason I go into some of the behaviors, is because while there's this bond with Daniel and Jamar, sometimes it feels hopeless, and I love him so much, but I can't fix him. And having to put him at 7 in an inpatient psychiatric hospital doesn't even seem real. I never would have predicted that because he's so smart, but he's so ill. And it doesn't feel fair, and it isn't fair. But I think the difference is I don't feel evil in this situation. I feel difficulty in the situation. I see the difficulty of humanity and how God, we live in community. He created us in community, and we live in community partly for these reasons. Because while we may feel as parents, and I think Daniel and Jamar feel, that we are on the outside sometimes looking in at other people's lives and envious that they can go to sporting events and they can go to a church near them and they can go to the grocery store. Difficult, but still doable. We look in from the outside and we just understand that's not our life and that's never going to be, but God is there with us. The people have come alongside us, and the skill and the understanding and the compassion is where I see God the most. we're living in a time where it feels like it's easy to point at the darkness or look to the darkness, look to the hopelessness. But really, if you allow yourself to be a little bit vulnerable and allow people to peek into your world a little bit, it seems that most of the time, people are compassionate and understanding and willing to help. And feeling that against some of the judgment, I think has saved us from sort of giving up. And everybody who knows Daniel falls in love with him. And that God has blessed him with that likability and his intelligence. I'm also glad we can afford wrinkle cream. Very important. Daniel came to us at 3.5 weeks old. Jamar came to us at 3 days old. We understand that God made them the way they are for a reason. Sometimes we feel like God gives us more than we can handle. He overestimates us. I feel like it's not fair that Daniel has to handle all the things that he has to handle. I feel sad and confused why God wouldn't want us to go to events that normal families go to that we just can't. A baseball game or the science center. The science center is somewhere every family goes, and we just can't do that. We can't do that because there will be violence. There's too much noise. There's too many kids. And my son just can't handle that. And I wouldn't put him in the position to try to handle that anymore. We've come to terms with how he's made and how his mental illness affects what he's able to do and what we're able to do. My prayer right now is for God to continue to open doors, to provide doctors, friends, neighbors that understand, not to make Daniel someone different, not even necessarily to change the situation. When I took Daniel to the hospital, he was placed directly in inpatient psychiatric care. He displayed the behaviors while we were there, with the violence and the risk-taking and self-harm behaviors. I was told later by many of our workers, our behavioral workers, that doesn't happen, particularly that young of an age. That's exactly the help that he needed, but usually there are barriers in place, and God just removed those barriers, and there happened to be a doctor working a weekend that is extremely skilled and is a go-to person in Des Moines for psychiatric help in our area. And so there have been miracles along the way that we didn't expect, and even people that have worked with children for 30 years have said they've never seen anything like it. I still had to go get him from school, but it wasn't as bad. I don't get the peeing and the spreading, poop on the walls and all that. Thank you. Just for you.